This is Real Talk Live. And Real Talk Live is basically my opportunity to have a live conversation with individuals, entrepreneurs, influencers in the business world. And when you start discussing conversations with people who are in the political stream, city council, maybe in the province or state, or even if you're in a federal government role, they're all influencing business in some way. And we've been going through a lot of changes, a lot of issues, and we want to get some individuals such as Jeff Davison to come on board. And now, Jeff, I think you're on board. I need you to click that request to chat if you can. I will wave out at you. And I think if you can just try to connect, we'll be able to have a good conversation. Let's hope Jeff can accept our invite to this, and we'll be on in just a second here. So I'm really looking forward to having him on here. And this is where the opportunities come, where you can ask your questions live. We can have a good conversation, a bit of an update of what the city is doing and what's happening out there. And so when we have him on here, feel free to put your questions in there. I'll try to field them as best as I can, because I think it's an opportunity for everyone to get what's on their mind, what they're thinking about, what's going on in their businesses, with their family and friends' businesses if they're not an entrepreneur or business owner at this time. So there's going to be a whole bunch of conversation we're going to have with Jeff, and he's been a really good contributor for me for information of what's going on from the city perspective. So I really like to have him on the show. So like I was saying before, Real Talk Live with Faisal Karmali. On this show, you get the chance to see a live interview. You get the opportunity to have this conversation with us, and we are able to have live questions in here too. So we've been using Instagram Live as an opportunity, and we want to make sure that there is your voice mentioned and your voices are going to be heard. And then we're also going to have a bunch of questions that I have that many business owners, entrepreneurs, and individuals like myself for our guests. And today's guest, when he gets on board, he's just trying to connect with us, is Councilman Jeff Davison. He has been a longtime contributor to my content, to my own business and practice, and then we can go from there. And then we can also look at, we'll be able to have that conversation. So feel free to put in your questions now. Find out if anybody on my team can reach out to Jeff Davison and help him out with connecting on here. We're waiting for Jeff to get connected on here, and then we don't want to come off and go back on. So we want to keep this rolling the whole time. So if someone can help Jeff connect to our live, we'll be more than happy to have him on board. So I'd like you guys to ask these questions. Come out, send out some questions. We can have some dialogue along the way. Many of you are dialing in right now, connecting to this. There's a whole bunch of people who have a lot of questions about what the city can do, what the provinces can do, what can the federal government do. So when Jeff comes on board, he's a city councilman. So I want to see what the city is doing. I think there's a lot of opportunity for individuals to go there. So what we're waiting to see about is what's the next phase of this, and there he is. Jeff, how are you, sir?
Hey, sorry about that. That was
no problem.
I've got my my stand here. I'm trying to build this so I can work the Instagram account and do this all at the same time, which is technology challenges. Here we go.
Of course, we're all expecting that. If you didn't have technology challenges, I'd be surprised, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. I fortunately have an 8-year-old who was really he's a big Lego guy, and so he built me a whole stand that I can set my phone on and connect my earpiece in the bottom. It's a whole family matter here being on the show tonight. Yeah,
fantastic. Everybody getting involved.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So before you came on board, I was just talking to the viewers, letting them know that you've been a long-term contributor to my show. You've basically been telling us and giving us updates of what City Council's been talking about doing and thinking about. Mm-hmm. It was, I think, a couple weeks ago, that we had you on my show where we were talking about what's happening out there. And I think this is a good avenue for business owners to talk about their concerns. There's been a lot of Twitter movement conversation going on. There's been some LinkedIn conversation and also on Instagram about what the city is doing. And I want to start off, Jeff, by let's put the parameters of what we can control and what we can't control.
Sure.
And what I mean by that is there are many business owners who are talking to me saying, you know, Faisal, if we can just get another bailout program or some stimulus and so forth, well, that's not the city role, that's federal government, provincial government, and so forth. So yeah. What can, and the question for you today to start off would be, what can we as the city can do, what can't you do when it comes to providing help and assistance to business owners along the way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a challenge for municipalities, and not just for Calgary. It's a challenge for municipalities across the country right now to support business. Municipalities don't have the same luxuries, I guess, as the provinces and the federal government do. You know, we cannot run deficits legally. We just can't run deficits, and so we're really bound within the restrictions of what we have available to us in our toolbox. Even when you consider certain taxation items, those are things that we actually need the province to help us, create and move forward with, right? So, where the city can get involved is, looking at our tax plan. So we've put deferrals in place right now, for instance. So if you're on the TIPS program, basically we're saying just don't pay your tips, cancel off of it, and we'll get us through to October penalty free, and then businesses can sign up and we'll figure out how that cost is amortized over future times. But again, it's pretty limited, right? I mean, cities can't create stimulus spending, so we really have to think about things through tax, think about things through what we have in terms of revenue opportunities and what future opportunities we may have. I mean, very quickly here, governments across this country are going to run out of, capital, right? It's going to get tighter and tighter as things go forward. And so we've really got to think about, things where we can expand our tax base, not our tax rate. That's one thing we have to be mindful of. Council has put forward a 12% cut to business taxes, so that's one big step forward. So we've limited that, and we've got to look at doing more of that. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, we have to figure out how we can continually reduce our cost of operations, yet still invest in revenue driving potential, because taxation models are old and broken.
We've had some conversations with business owners in the past, and they've been saying to me, let's talk about what the city can do to get rid of some of the red tape. One of the concerns or complaints that I hear from business owners is that the red tape to get into running a business is very cumbersome here in Calgary. And so what can the city do, or what conversations have you had that can reduce that red tape or eliminate some of that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, the city set up a number of task forces right now, the first of which is set up and focused on business. And so that's really to address a couple of things. We've got survival, recovery, and resiliency is sort of three themes we're really thinking about going forward. And we're going to be in that survival mode, if you will, for quite some time. And so the business task force is really set out to say, how can we get rid of that red tape? How can we stand businesses up sooner? Even considering things like, if you've got a development permit in place and it's going to expire, how do we use our tools within the permitting system to say, don't worry about it, go out and figure it out. You don't have to come back to us and reapply for these things, because we know that's costly. And in particular, it's costly when you're looking at larger developments. So we're trying to figure out ways to better enable business, not just to keep that money here and keep their focus here, but also reduce that red tape going forward.
And so let's talk about the business task force. Kind of walk through what has the city decided. And one of the questions that was sent to us was, there's a task force that we believe has been established already. Why haven't we found out who's on that task force, and when will that become public, if possible?
So there's really 5 task forces that we've stood up. 2 of them are really focused on community and really figuring out that not-for-profit sector, the social aspect of some of the challenges we're going to have going forward. And then you have a third committee that's really focused on sort of the immediate right now. That's your emergency response. Then you have the business task force. The business task force is really, like I say, focused on that survival mode. How do we figure out ways to get business stood back up, turn it around and get them operating. And, we've got some scary figures right now. We're thinking right now, potentially, you could see up to 30% of businesses not reopen. That's scary when you consider that business in Calgary is the single largest provider of employment, right? Small business. And then we've got the committee I sit on, which is the Economic Resiliency Task Force. And that's really going to bridge the gap between that recovery phase and that resiliency phase. It's really about thinking about long-term. One of the focuses we really want to hammer down on is thinking about how do you retool the city after this? How do you focus on reinvestment in the community? I think, as we go forward, one of the biggest challenges we're going to have, and not just Calgary, again, this is like all municipalities, the world's going to compete differently for capital. It's going to compete differently for talent and attraction of that talent. You really have to think about the tools that you have locally and the incentives you can provide locally to compete on the bigger scale, because you really have to think about that long term. I often say to some of my colleagues right now, the unfortunate thing about being under multiple states of emergency, you feel like all the time you want to get out and provide a solution. You want to get out there and just say, we can fix this tomorrow if we just did this. It's not the reality. And unfortunately, at times like this, what the bigger challenge is saying, today we found a solution for X, but tomorrow that solution may not apply anymore, right? And so you've got multiple levels of government. Again, we really look to the province and the federal government to create that stimulus side of things. It's really about taking that committee and focusing on what tools have those order of government put forward to us, and how can we see the opportunities for us in those? How can we leverage those opportunities to create economic impact in Calgary?
So will this task force be announced and public for people to see who they are?
Yeah, and again, the business task force itself is really the one operating in the immediate, right? Once we get the resiliency task force stood up, that's where we'll focus on that recovery and resiliency side. And so we've gone through a number of selections. I believe they're going out to individuals probably this week in terms of who's going to be sitting on that committee with us, because we're really looking to go to those big brains in Calgary, right? I mean, the one thing I recognized a long time ago is I don't need to be the guy with the solution all the time. I'm not the smartest guy in the room, right? But I can go find those people. And that's what this job allows you to do. You don't have to be the guy standing there trying to make up an answer or make up something all the time. It's really about who are the people we can go and tap and say, your city needs you right now. I need you to come help me with something.
Yeah. Well, I've been talking to business owners on Zoom and so forth, and they've been saying to me, just cut property tax, or cut, we're people too, so cut our residential property tax. Is it that easy? Can we just cut it, like commercial, residential, or we've done a deferral to some degree till October 1, but can we just say, let's do zero tax for property, both commercial, residential, till January 1. I'm making up a date here, but
sure.
Is it that easy to do?
Well, not really as a municipality, because again, we can't run that deficit, right? And so it really boils down to what services do you value, right? And so, if you consider things like the city's operational budget, I mean, it's an astronomical number. The majority of that budget, though, is made up in police, fire, roads, and transit, right? And so you think about that's sort of 84% of your operational budget is those four things. No citizen has ever come up to me and said, I'm okay feeling less safe on the streets. Right, we're already about 700 officers short per capita in this city. They value services and emergency services when we need them. They come at a cost. We're a big city now. We're spread out in terms of geography, so that has its own unique challenges versus some cities that are a little more contained. Could you do it? Sure, that's an option. But I think you'd find that citizens would eventually, and most studies show, where you've gone and done major cuts to services, within 3 years, those services are back and they're costing you more money because you've now had to restand them back up.
This ruling of no deficit for the city of Calgary, is that a Alberta law, or is that other provinces participate in that? Because I've seen other cities raise money to the bond market as an example.
Yeah.
That says, they can go into probably the deficit or some debt at least to cover some of these expenses.
Yeah, well, other municipalities have those options here in Alberta. I don't believe that's an option for us. We have looked at some of the bond markets, but the bond markets are tight right now, right? I mean, it's the availability of capital out there is tightening up, and so for me, I'd rather not go out and have to leverage into market like that, because it's really just accumulating debt. I think we've got a great situation just in our industrial land base. You know, here's something we could do to incentivize businesses to come here, set up and take over industrial land. It develops a tax base. We make money on the land. And if you think about things like Vancouver, the reason it's being set up as sort of that inland hub, if you will, or we've got a good movement strategy here, is really because places like Vancouver have run out of space. And so for us, you know, there's a real game to be played for us as a municipality and real leverage point to just move forward with a new plan for industrial land here. I think, you know, despite what people sometimes say, our portfolio here in Calgary is very well managed. We're going to have some very significant challenges with respect to the oil patch and what's going to happen there over the next 6 to 8 months. I can tell you I've had a number of conversations with various CEOs in that industry over the last 2-3 weeks, and it's not looking good for those folks, right? You know, as great as it is to see, you know, $1.7 billion or $2.5 billion or whatever it's invested now into the Orphan Well program, that's really, you know, investing in environmental reclamation. That's not actually putting people to work here in Calgary. And that is going to be a challenge, because if you think about that, the more oil falls, the more these businesses fail. You have, you know, the possibility that we decentralize our downtown more and more. Those office towers that we rely on to cover a lot of that operational cost, where we, you know, we pick up the majority of our tax base, are going to get devalued. So, you know, I go back to kind of the first statement I made. Right now is a real opportunity for us to look at how we retool the city and what we're going to be in and not in. But we've got to get a plan together. It's got to be a solid strategy that's executable, and we have to be able to enact it.
So I'm getting some questions coming in on IG
Sure.
Live, and I want to just let these individuals know that this is focused on business, entrepreneurs, and stuff like that. When it comes to some of the other issues that the city has to deal with, because there's so much, we're just going to focus on businesses. So I do appreciate the questions coming in. Just be aware that we're going to kind of channel those questions in there. One comment that was made was that we need to get away from relying on oil. Now, that's a provincial
Sure.
matter to some degree, but it's also a city a matter. And we've always been talking, at least I've been talking publicly now for over 10 years on the airwaves, saying we need to diversify, we need to diversify.
Totally.
And so what are the conversations or plans that the city has within the city's control to entice, invite, stimulate other industries outside of oil and gas to come to Calgary? Because we've got some smart people, Jeff. We've got, you know, when people talk about Amazon and big companies like that, I'm talking about just SMEs, small, medium-sized enterprises that can bring some different value. And especially during COVID times, we can bring other industries. Like, why can't we be the health center of Canada here in Calgary?
Yeah.
Right? Like, why not bring that as and that's an example, but what are some of the conversations or ideas that are coming out from the City Council from that?
Yeah, I mean, so I sit on Calgary Economic Development's board of directors. I also sit on the Opportunity Calgary Investment Fund. And, you know, I'll give you my 2 cents of the world. You know, you started off by saying, should we be sort of moving away from oil? One of the very first things I did when we got to Calgary Economic Development, I remember sitting in a strategy meeting where we talked about, you know, we had sort of, you know, clean tech, and we had green energy, and we had oil and gas. And I'd said at the time, I said, why have you guys bucketed those out differently? Well, they're a bit of a different sector and blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, but they're not. They're energy, right? You know, I go back to a conversation I had with Lisa Helps, the mayor of Victoria, when I took her up to see Foster Creek's, or Cenovus's Foster Creek site. And one of the things we started off the conversation by saying was, you know, I think a lot of people think that, you know, oil and gas is probably the way of the future. It's not. I mean, but the reality is that it's timing and tactics that will lessen our reliance on hydrocarbons. You know, you can't cut things off tomorrow without a plan for the future. And so these arbitrary government timelines that people come in and say, well, in 20 years, we're going to do the following. It's great to say those things, but if you don't have your hand on the wheel to do it, it's almost virtually impossible to get there. You know, I, like you, 10 years ago, were very much out there championing technology. I started a technology company. I'd moved from oil and gas into tech. And I can tell you that 10 years ago, you know, in 07 even, when we had really the height of pricing of oil, and it fell through sort of 2009 and then further through 2012. Well, by 2012, I can tell you that as a small publicly traded, like small cap technology company in Canada, there were this many people paying attention to it. Yeah. And it was a huge opportunity for us to diversify the economy, but we were too busy scrambling, trying to figure out what we were going to do in the oil and gas sector. cut to now, one of the bigger conversations I keep trying to have, both with the federal government and with the province, is stop talking about oil and gas, start talking about energy. First and foremost, companies like Cenovus don't want to be oil and gas companies for the next 2 years. They want to be energy companies for the next 200 years. And even if you look to Saudi Arabia and what they've planned, I mean, Saudi Arabia, their government is master planning for 200 years. If you think that they think oil is the biggest thing for them, they don't. It's why they reinvest 60% of their profits back into technology, because they want to be the energy providers for that long, not just sort of that small window of, however long hydrocarbons will produce for. Canada's set up in a very unique position. I mean, if you think about our oil sands, we have more recoverable reserves up there than the entire Middle East, right? You have operational costs that we can reduce. You have environmental standards. You have, protection for employees and humanitarian standards. It's all of those things that we have to start getting behind and saying, we all agree that we're going to eventually lessen our reliance on hydrocarbons, but let's agree on some timing and tactics that are realistic to get us there. And that's what's missing from these environmental pro-oil conversations, is that people have gotten positional on it. And when you get positional, it's virtually impossible to get to a solution. You need somebody who can, like our government here in Calgary, that can bring these people together. Because for me, I see Calgary as being a center of excellence for all things energy. I don't think we need to be known as, an oil and gas boom and bust town. We need to be doing things that really take Calgary, not just through the next 10 years, but through the next 200 years.
Cities like Detroit or Hamilton reinvented themselves. Hamilton, for example, was a steel town. And I use the word was because that's not what they're known for today.
Yeah.
They've been able to bring in businesses outside of the steel industry to that city. How did they do it, or how do cities actually transition to get away? Let's say we want to get away from being energy dependent. And I'm not speaking of the utilization of the energy product, but actually the businesses around it. And so how do we get away from that, and how do we bring in other industries into our city?
Well, number one, I mean, through Calgary Economic, we've been working on a number of incentives for the tech industry, first of all, to try and figure that question out. I mean, if you think about it, Calgary's in a very unique position, but it's a position that cities like Detroit, Kalamazoo, Austin, many municipalities in the U.S. have been in before. You even look at Kitchener-Waterloo. Yeah. The whole premise behind putting the Opportunity Calgary Investment Fund together was to have a tool like those municipalities did to become a catalyst for change, right? This is not a case of corporate welfare that people want to throw that term around all the time, right? We as a city have to compete differently. We have to have better tools than the other guys, and we have to be able to enact it. And so, we often get the conversation of, well, people say it's $15,000 a job for this or that. It's not. It's about, I think to date, we've had 988 employment positions, high quality employment positions created. We've spent about $270,000 at milestone markers for companies, even though we've sort of allocated up to about $18 million in funding for those companies. We've only spent $250,000, right? Yeah. And if you think about it, we've created 988 jobs with that. And we've leveraged $163.5 million in private sector investment into our city. And so it's a significant tool. Yeah. Where we need to take that tool is like those other municipalities, partnering with institutions like the University of Calgary, because when it comes to creating a tech incubator city, you have to be able to have more than one. And by what I mean by that is, when people move here, say you get an Amazon that moves here, one of the reasons companies like that end up not coming here, it's not because of taxes, it's not because of property values. It's because a lot of their employees go, well, if I want to leave the company, where do I go? So I'm not willing to move there because there's no lateral move for me. You have to set the environment up. And for us in Calgary, it's about, number one, how do we take OSIP as a tool that differentiates us as a city? How do we better partner with the university and, even places like SAIT and Mount Royal to say, we need to become a tech incubator, be a partner on the board. We're not a place for you to come for government handouts when the province cuts your funding. We need you at the table as a partner to tell us what can we do to become a catalyst to get people into this province. But number three, you need your provincial government on side with you. If you look at all those other jurisdictions that have been successful in doing this, Texas, Detroit, Detroit, all of those places have always had state governments backing the program with them. And so they've come along and said, all right, you guys put that much money in, we'll kick in this. And then you work together to go to the private sector and say, look, guys, if we really want to figure out a way to diversify, if we really want to become that, next generation energy city, here's the things we need. Get involved with us.
Yeah. I've been talking to entrepreneurs who are parents, and they're saying that their children, as they graduate secondary, post-secondary education, Calgary's not in the top 3 for places for them to have their careers, unless they're in the oil and gas sector, which again, that's limited now. And a lot of parents are saying, well, maybe you don't want to be in that kind of industry.
Yeah.
How do we keep that next generation here? Because I believe there's a lot of smart individuals coming out of our post-secondary education systems here in this province. We've got other schools outside the city. How do we attract Calgary? Like, what's so special about Calgary that we can attract this talent? Because that's going to be the next round of the future. And some of those are going to be just, business owners who are just going to be able to innovate in outside of just regular tech. And I mean, when we talk about tech, we talk about these big companies, but you built a tech company. You know what it's like. So how do we retain that kind of capital?
I think it's number one, it's placemaking. What type of city do we want to be, and who do we want, really living here and contributing back to our society. It's creating the right business environment to incubate and encourage that talent to be here. But the biggest thing I always think about when I think about these things is that, we've become a very instant gratification society, and there's nothing instant that we can do to turn the economy around. There's no silver bullet. There's no magic pill we can give everybody. It's going to require long-term thinking and hard work. That's it. I mean, and we've got to remain steadfast, and we've got to be committed to a long-term solution. Because if we don't have that, we're never going to get there. I mean, I always think about things like even looking at the Opportunity Calgary Investment Fund. We've had this fund set up for 2.5 years. I can tell you, every time there's a crisis, every time there's a budget talk, whatever, it's low-hanging fruit to go over there and say, well, just give us that money back. We want to put it towards something else. Well, what's the something else going to get us? Is it going to get us more people employed? Probably not. Is it going to contribute to one-time spending that we've got to lessen our reliance on? That's all it would do. Like, this is going to require, sticking together in a strategy. We've got a full council-approved Calgary in the New Economy strategy. You got to stick to it, right? You got to see it through. And where a lot of these things fail is on the execution side, because it's great to go there and say, oh, we've got a strategy, we're going to get there. You have to do the work.
Sometimes I feel that I don't know what the vision is. And let me give you an analogy of what I mean by that. Whenever we hear a National Hockey League franchise saying we're going to rebuild,
yeah,
we understand that there's a Stanley Cup they're going after. There's some goal that they're trying to achieve. What's the vision for this city, and how do we get behind that vision? Because that's one thing that if everybody, relatively speaking, in the city understands what the vision is, then maybe we can all know this is going to be a longer journey, but we're all in this together, that kind of concept, right? So what's the vision for the city?
I think from time to time, the hard part about having, a civic government that's 15 people who are elected is you all kind of have different visions, right? Your job is to lobby 8 votes and move forward with that vision. For me, it's really about creating and incubating a place where, Calgarians can see prosperity again. I'm always reminded of why I took this job. I took this job actually quite selfishly. I've got 3 kids, and I want to see them grow up in this city, and I want to see them have opportunity in this city. And I can tell you, I've talked to many of my friends whose kids are coming out of high school, who are coming out of university, and it's a sad day in Calgary when you have to tell your kids you've got to go find opportunity somewhere else. Calgary is the place you come for opportunity. Just ask anyone from Saskatchewan. I joke, but it's true. But it really is, right? It's the place that people far and wide have come to. I mean, there's a reason why we are the 4th most livable city in the world. And I think sometimes we take for granted what's around us and how good we actually have it in this city. Other municipalities around the world, frankly, would kill to have some of Calgary's problems, right? We're still finding ways to drive new revenue opportunities. We're still finding ways to, try and make a balance happen between amenities and placemaking, but be sensible about what we're spending that money on. For me, it's about getting back to that vision. It's about, the place you want to come where you have sort of limited government interference and people can be free to enjoy and live life in prosperity. And that's really what I want to see for Calgary. And
so
I think we've lost that.
I'm a Calgary boy, Jeff. I was born and raised here. I've lived in the Northeast. I'm living in the Southwest. I've been in the city, and I could tell you, growing up, we were an oil town.
Yep.
We were known for that. That was our vision. If you want to be in the energy sector, this is the place to be. And every other business that surrounded themselves that came and spun off of that industry, we knew where we were going. Where are we going now? What are we going to be known for? What would Jeff want this city to be known for when it comes to an industry leader in the future?
Well, I mean, I go back, I think, like you, born and raised here, right? I'm born and raised in the ward I now represent. I'm incredibly close to this city. But you're right. I mean, over the years, we've been known as a cow town, an oil town, a stampede town, whatever you want to call us. And as I often say to people right now, I say, but the biggest thing Calgary is in terms of who we are, is a resilient town. I mean, and I think there's no time in our history that we have to remember more of that. It's times like this. Calgary can rebuild itself. We've proven we have, and we've lived through the boom and bust cycles. But we've got to be smarter about it this time. We really have to be thinking about the long-term goals and the environment we live in today. The world's changed around us. The things that worked in 1983 to pull us out of, an economic slump are not going to be the same tactics we use today. But that's where I get back to, leverage the things you're known for, leverage the things you're good at, and figure out a way to make them move forward. And that's why, for me, I don't talk anymore about being an oil and gas town. I talk about being an energy town.
That's a very interesting viewpoint, an energy town. And do you think that directive has to come from the mayor? Because the mayor has a lot of the spotlight. And this mayor in particular has received a lot of the spotlight nationally and internationally. Mm-hmm. And what I haven't heard from this mayor is what the vision is. Are we going to be an energy town? And that means multiple different types of energy, like you mentioned. Is it his job? I know you have a responsibility. I have a responsibility. But when it comes to set the vision, culture starts from the top and works its way down. Do you think that the current mayor is doing that job to set the vision? And if not, what do you think he should do?
Look, I mean, I think every elected official is there and has to contribute to vision, right? And from time to time, we're always going to have, different viewpoints. And primarily in municipalities where you don't have a party system, that's where you got to go out and say, but, get your votes. You need 8 votes to move forward in this city. And that's pretty much what I intend to do with this vision, is to figure out a way that we can become that economic resiliency city, figure out how we can be that energy city and move the program forward. I don't think it's as simple as saying, is it the mayor's job? I think, every elected official is there because regardless of why you came to the table, regardless of what you stand for, I'll tell you that every elected official is there because they care about their city and they see it, they see wanting to go somewhere different. The challenge is can you line up the people to help get you there? For me, I look at this as more of, you can't rely on just the mayor or just a councillor or just the premier. You've got to rely on the people that can build consensus, that can build collaboration and can work together. And, we get asked all the time, well, the mayor did this, mayor did that, from time to time, you're always going to have to work with people you disagree with. The challenge is how do you actually move forward? And that's what I'm after, right? Yeah. I tend to not get positional about things because I want to figure out a way that we can actually move a vision forward, that we can actually achieve a strategy. I hate talking about strategy when we can't execute on it.
Correct. My biggest pet peeve. We're getting questions in about businesses that are closed and protection measures and so forth. I'm not quite sure of what this individual means about, are there protection measures placed for businesses that are closed? But let's talk about, there's been a few that have at least hit the media about businesses being closed, partly because of lack of response times from other governmental support and so forth. And part of it could be because they had a poor business and they had to shut down. Let's be honest here. So what what has the city, or what can the city do to help businesses from or prevent businesses from closing down?
Well, I mean, again, that's where we go back to what are the tools that the federal government and the provincial government have put in place, and how do we as a municipality support those businesses? So one of the things that came out of the business sector task force is the hashtag support local YYC. Mm-hmm. It's funny because, you'll know this. I mean, you go back to February, right? Investors were riding on highs we probably haven't seen ever. Things were kind of good. But we became this, in my opinion, instant gratification society, right? It's easier to order something on Amazon than to go down the street and support the guy who's trying to survive in Aspen, right? It's easier to order something from, an online service versus going to the local hardware store in Britannia, whatever that is, right? The support local YYC is really to get out and say, actually, buying locally matters, right? When you go out and you support a business, those businesses are paying taxes, right? They've got brick and mortar that they've got to deal with. They require people to go there, right? Yeah. And a lot of what we were seeing in the city is that even though income levels were high, investment income was high, it wasn't translating to spend out there in the community, right? It was translating to spend, just not locally. And so one of the things we want to do is really kind of focus on how do you take money away from those sort of big multinational corporations and really put it back in the pocketbook of the local folks.
And that's what I think Quebec just announced recently, where they're going to have this online program to support local Quebec-based businesses. Now, this is a provincial matter, yeah. And they're doing this type of stuff. I think Calgary can definitely do it. You've started that, you've kicked that off, and that's a good start. Who else has to be at the table for this? So I understand that we have the City of Calgary. I know local business owners have been in the mindset of instant gratification. If I open up a business, people will just come. Yeah. And they're taking that for granted too. So I know we're not going to harp on them because they're going through some tough times right now as well, but they got to own some of it. So we've got the city, we've got business owners. Who else, or who are the stakeholders that need to be at that table to push this local movement going forward?
Well, again, I mean, I think, it does require multiple orders of government to be at the table together, right? Whether it's wage subsidies right now, whether it's rent deferrals, those are all things that, provincially and federally, we can create stimulus through, right? For us as a municipality, it's really about how do we help these businesses get stood back up? So again, buying local. When you think about things like, there's a lot of things going around in the media right now about Skip the Dishes and Uber Eats. A lot of these fees that they're charging people are high, right? Yeah. Now, all of these businesses signed up because they valued the marketing these opportunities give them. They value the service. It means they don't have to hire their own drivers. They can just outsource everything. Some of the challenge like that right now, though, is when, a Skip the Dishes driver, let's say, looks at the review and says, well, you know what, they only tipped 15%, I want 18, or I'm not taking the run. That's where we start creating a problem, right? So the guy in the kitchen now who has had an order sitting there for 2 hours, waiting for Skip the Dishes or whoever to pick this up. And I'm not trying to pick on Skip the Dishes. I'm just saying, they're probably the most well-known mobile delivery
in the city.
You've got orders sitting there. So now the customer says, well, wait a minute, hang on a second. I'm mad at the business because the business didn't get me my dinner on time, when they're trying to get the dinner to them, right? And so, it's a balance of, do you have to go in and limit fees that can be collected at a time like this on companies like that? But the other side of that equation is, why is there government interference in this? If they didn't want these people to be engaged in their contract, fire them, right?
Yeah.
So,
So why not have a competitor? Why not open up to the talent that we have in this city to be and we'll use Skip the Dishes as the example, the competitor, and say, hey, look, and I interviewed a local restaurant owner in the city. I had no idea, but 20 to 30% off the bill goes to Skip the Dishes.
That's right. It's a huge
Holy cow. And I thought it was 5%. Like, I thought there was a little commission here. That's it. No, it's 20 to 30%. So that caught me off guard. And one of her feedback to me was, well, just call the restaurant. Well, that's an extra step that I have to do now versus the convenience, that instant gratification you're referring to before. Yep. Can we not motivate the talent that we have in the city to be a competitor where we can then incent them to maybe take a less of a revenue, not 20, 30%, maybe 10%, but do local and provide more flexibility, drivers, so forth. I know a lot of infrastructure start up a business, but I haven't seen anything from the city to say, look, guys, these guys are taking a lot off the top just to help you through the whole COVID crisis. Can we get a company that can compete? Let's do some incentives for these businesses. Let's be pro business to get business to compete with business, so we can drive down price, get more activity out there in the COVID crisis and even after the COVID crisis, as long as you're focusing on local businesses. Is that an opportunity we can look at?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Right. Again, though, I say it's a balance between, where do you need that government intervention and where should the market just dictate? Right. And it's a challenge, too, because I think when some of these businesses are signing up for things like Skip the Dishes, you have to remember that sometimes it's not as easy as calling the restaurant anymore, because they probably don't have a local driver anymore. Right.
Correct.
And you factor in things like just, the wage increases that the province has gone through and other things. Small businesses have had to make hard decisions in terms of, what am I going to staff? How am I going to market? And when you have an opportunity like a Skip the Dishes that comes and you say, well, it's a 30% fee and I'll pay that because I get marketing out of it, plus I got a driver, they seem like a reliable service. The world operates as it kind of should, right? No government intervention, but, you've got sort of business dealing with business. But certainly it's one of the things we're looking at right now, because I think, a lot of these small businesses are struggling to say, number one, I'm having staffing challenges because the staff I'm keeping, could arguably getting paid the same on EI as they're probably getting for minimum wage right now, or close enough to. So there's some people that are actually saying, what, I'll just take the EI. I don't want to work right now. And during a time like COVID, they might say that I just don't feel comfortable going to work, and that's a fair argument out there right now. But when you're paying minimum wage and it's $15 an hour, it's hard keeping those staff members motivated to come to work, and then you've got to deal with the whole business side. You're trying to figure out how you're going to defer your taxes, how you're going to defer your rent. A lot of these businesses that you're seeing, even in the delivery placement right now, this isn't their total wheelhouse, right? These are people running the local pub that ordinarily would not rely on takeout service, and are now having to do that just to maintain some sort of semblance of their business. And that's where it's going to really struggle. A lot of these businesses too, one of the things we're trying to think of is, how do you stand them up again quicker? Because, after weeks of, maintenance probably being deferred and stoves shut down and food orders you got to get in place, even when restrictions start getting lessened, how do you ensure that these businesses can get up to speed quickly? Because some of them are saying it might take me up to 3 weeks to get restarted.
Yeah. What's your understanding of how this the city's innovation lab has been going, and what's come out of it? And are there any efficiencies or savings that the city has received from that? That's one question that we got that came in.
So there's some of the innovation lab stuff that we're working on is through Calgary Economics. Some partnered with the University of Calgary. That's sort of incubation of new talent, and it's going very, very well. I mean, I think, those are the things that require long-term focus, but will create the jobs you want them to create. Probably, I think maybe what they mean is, what is coming out of some of the property tax task forces that we put together. A lot of the information they were set to bring back was to come back, I believe, at the end of April. I think that has been somewhat deferred now due to COVID to June's meeting of council. But that's where, again, you're trying to leverage those big thinkers, right? I mean, we're trying to pull together the people that have expertise in taxation and come to us and say, look, you very well understand the restrictions the municipalities are under. You understand what the provinces can and can't do. What are the options we have going forward? Because the current model's broken. We need, we need assessment reform. We need taxation reform. You look at major infrastructure projects going forward. You're not going to continue to fund these capital projects and the operations of these projects on the basis of 35-year-old taxation models. It's just not possible anymore.
Yeah. So when we talk about this instant gratification world that we're in, and I totally agree with you. If I put something on an order on Amazon and it's not here in an hour, I'm upset. So that's just what the kind of world we live in today. And you're talking about a vision or a change of how Calgary needs to be. What kind of time frame are you looking at? I think our audience needs to know that when you think in the future, we're not talking a year.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking years. And so if you're to ballpark how long it would take us to rebuild our city in a way that would be an energy city, but multi-energy,
Mm-hmm.
and it would be also a wide diversified portfolio of businesses that are in this city, how long do you think it'll take us to rebuild?
Well, I mean, even when we talk about energy, I think it's important to remember that the city's looking at other sectors as well. The agribusiness is huge, and we're trying to be really a center of excellence for that as well. You look at pharmaceuticals, really in sort of North America, on the western half of North America, we want to be that place. We've got the talent here, we've got the institutions here, we've got the places where you can develop. So we're trying to move forward in multiple sectors. Again, to me, I think this COVID time has really taught us that you really need to look at, the survival, the recovery, and the resiliency side. Not so much in maybe those words, but you have to look at, what are the short-term wins we can go after, and how do those ladder up to that long-term win? So for me, the remainder of my time on council here is really trying to set up, how we can move the economy in much bigger ways over, the next decade. But beyond that, how do you build resiliency into your plan so that 10 years from now, we're not having a conversation about economic diversification because plan B didn't work, right? So, I think there's a lot of things that you need to do and change right now to support business and incubate talent in the city. I think there's a lot of things we're doing right. There's a lot of things we can improve on, and we could spend all day arguing about each one of those things. But it requires that execution of a short-term strategy, right? Retooling the city and moving in a different direction. And then figuring out what is your long-term goal, right? I think it's going to be a challenge for us to say, well, in 2 years, we're going to be an energy city. Because to some degree, we're at the mercy of world oil prices and economic situations and other governments that, it all ladders down to that sector a little bit. And so I think, as we continue to figure out what in particular is going to happen with oil and gas, we need to start retooling as an energy city to start saying, what are the reinvestments we need to make? Because those reinvestments will rely on putting people back to work. We've got a city that has an incredibly highly educated workforce. Tap into those brains and help them move in a different way.
There is a lot of times where I hear your peers in council talk about, well, the province has to do this or the province has to do that. And it seems sometimes we're just pointing the finger to other governments and so forth on occasion.
Mm-hmm.
I would assume, because I don't assume that government is so, in general, so efficient, that the communication between federal, provincial, and municipal is missing some stuff there. And
Mm-hmm.
so when there's programs that the federal government puts out, or there's programs that the provincial government has initiatives on, and the city wants to do something, how is the conversation going between those three levels of government so that, what happens federally can trickle down to Calgary? Because again, we always feel that we're being left out of a lot of the federal programs, but what kind of communications happening, and what initiatives are we all collaborating on to help Calgarians?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? Because I think a lot of people want to say it's finger pointing. It's not. It requires partnership. It requires, governments to not be positional in terms of, bipartisan politics. I think the statement was made the other day in council, despite, where we feel locally we are with the federal government, Calgary in the last 4-year cycle had more money donated from the federal government here than anywhere else in the country. Well, next to Montreal, I should say. So that tells me that we've got those things. I think it's been, unfortunately, I think, the talking points in places like Calgary over the last few years have gotten to a point of toxicity, right? It's become a dumpster fire of conversation, if you will. But like it or not, I think a time like COVID has taught us that you got to get past that stuff, right? You really have to figure out what are the things that are important in life and figure out how do you work together. And so, I would certainly say that, whether it's locally on council or whether it's through provincial or federal partnerships, I don't think I've seen a time in the time I've been elected that those three orders of government are working better together. So
that's great to hear.
I think that's one, and we've got to keep doing that, right? You can't just pull out of COVID and then it's back to take the gloves off and start spitting across the fence at one another, right?
Yeah.
You know, that type of attitude doesn't get us anywhere. And it specifically doesn't get us anywhere as a municipality. You know, we have to work with whatever provincial government's elected. You know, we've seen that going from the NDP now to the UCP. You know, we have to work with, you know, the federal government, again, whoever's elected. I mean, to some degree, the municipalities are all out there with their hand out to the other orders of government. And if you want to play the game of, well, we don't need that, or why would we take the money? Well, if you don't, somebody else will, right? So, I mean, it's really about saying, you know, we're not taking money for the sake of taking money. We're taking money because we want to invest in a plan. And that's the big word, invest, right? Invest in the future, invest in opportunity, because then you can lessen your reliance on things like property taxes. Everybody wants to see property taxes go down. You got to have a plan to reduce it, right? Because going back to our previous part of the conversation, you know, people value the services they get in this municipality. And you've got to be able to pay for those services. And so you don't get one without the other. But again, it's about balance. And if you can create revenue driving opportunities that can, you know, figure out a way to lessen that reliance, that's, for me, the new way forward.
You know, Jeff, I've had you on my show many times. We never got to see face to face. We always have you on the phone. So I'm really happy that you took some time out of your personal schedule.
It's the face for radio. That's why.
This is the face for radio. That's the thing, right? That's why
it's the COVID haircuts. It's the faces. You know.
So I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your personal schedule to do this. We had to jockey around with schedules and so forth, and you made some time for me and my viewers to get an understanding of what's happening in the city. So I want to thank you so much. I have a question for you that I really want you to. I want to see how you answer this one. Will you be running for mayor the next time?
Yeah, that's you know, to be honest, right now it's not even something that's crossing my mind. I think, you know, we have significant economic challenges in front of us. We have significant items here in the city that we've got to face. I'm focused on getting us out of this, focused on turning this around, moving the city forward. I'm really not thinking about what those next steps might be. You know, you always get a few things. When you go out and accomplish something like, say, the event center, it's always going to be a something that, you know, people are either for or against. But at the end of the day, most people saw you kind of did what was the impossible. As I remind people all the time, that was just one thing. The city has many, many problems that we have to solve. And so, you know, whoever goes for that role going forward needs to have a plan. And they need to prove that they're not just a one-trick pony. So it's flattering, thank you, but maybe in the future we'll think about that.
All right, thank you so much, Jeff Davison, Councilman here in City of Calgary. Thank you so much for joining us on Real Talk Live.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for contributing back to the community.
Take care.
Take care.